Okay, well, welcome back to Ophelia Orlando. Today, my special guest is my dear, dear friend, Max. Would you like to introduce yourself, Max?
Hi, everyone. I'm a filmmaker, a writer, and producer here in Los Angeles.
Yes, and we went to film school together. We have some long history together, and Max is one of my absolute favorite people in the world to talk about movies with because we're both freaks and can geek out infinitely about anything. Do you remember our club that we started at Columbia?
Is it the queer culture cunts? Oh, no, we weren't queer. Well, you weren't queer at that
I
time. So
wasn't great.
yours just the
Culture
culture.
cuts. We should call it the queer culture.
Perfect.
And so today I wanted to talk about Victor Victoria. And actually, we just talked about this, but like, I don't know if this is even the best queer movie to show.
Probably not.
Not really. But I always think of you when I think of this movie, Max, because of the way I saw it. It was like 2 summers ago, and I was in Mexico City, and I was so sick. I was
Oh,
like bedridden, and I didn't have access to any streaming services because I was in Mexico, except for Criterion. And so I sent out this like call. I was like, "Who has some good Criterion movies that I could watch?" And you told me to watch this, and it just brought me to life. It was just such a like sweet and funny and like earnestly funny and slapstick in this way that it's just fun. They're having fun making this movie, and I love,
sure.
you
And
know.
it's Blake Edwards directing, who, from the Pink Panther franchise, which original Pink Panther franchise, which I'm a big fan of, and obviously has a great understanding of physical comedy. And I believe he was married to Julie Andrews,
He
actually.
was while making
Maybe.
this movie.
And I have an interesting connection to this, not really not that interesting, but basically when I saw the Broadway musical of this
Uh-huh.
in 1997 in London
Oh.
with Julie Andrews,
Oh.
and we found out at that very performance, they made the announcement that she would be retiring that week. And she gave her last performance like a day or two after we saw her, because her voice was starting to kind of go, and she wasn't feeling comfortable, and then she retired from singing in public that week. So
Wow.
I remember us thinking, I learning this right before the curtain went up. Like they made like an announcement basically,
Wow.
and we were just like, oh, okay, wow, like we felt really lucky to experience this and to see her, say even her at the end of her career is still, extraordinary.
Wow.
Uh, so yeah,
Amazing.
I never forget that.
Oh, that's so I didn't even know this was a musical. Was it a musical first
The
or
movie first and then a musical.
and then the star of the movie was in the musical? That's very rare.
Very rare, but she had that kind of crossover
Well,
thing
yeah.
going.
Just that she loved it enough to like stick around in this. I mean, this movie, it's weird. It's funny. Like, yeah, again, I was like, it's not like none of the main creative minds behind it are gay, as far as I can tell. But it still has this like for something that was made in the 80s that came out in a mainstream way, it plays with gender in a way that like I always think back to like 12th Night, the first time I ever saw 12th Night. And I was like, oh my God, like people fall in love with people that are dressed as different genders. That must mean that gender isn't quite as, firm as we think it is. And like that like just playing the queering, it's queering. It's not like very queer, but it's queering things. And I remember like when I watched it, I was just kind of like shocked at some of the things that are said in this movie that I didn't think people were saying in mainstream movies in the 80s. And Julie Andrews herself like is kind of the character who's like when she's talking to King about like in a lot of different moments when she's questioning his homophobia and the way he views women and things like that. I thought it was not radical, but definitely I don't know, brave in some ways.
For sure. Well, I also think if you look at it in like a continuum of like Some Like It Hot,
Yeah, this is
Cajo Full was made like maybe 10 to 15 years before this, and I guess Some Like It Hot's made in what, 1950 something, uh 50, 59, something like that. So if you go from like even Cajo Full to this, and then this to the Birdcage,
mm-hmm. Mm,
which is 10 years after this movie. So
okay.
it's in between Kajafol and the remake of Kajafol Birdcage, and how kind of gay life is sort of portrayed on screen obviously in Some Like It Hot, it is, nothing but implication or
Mhm.
innuendo, essentially. And Fall, it's there, but in a goofy, kind of stylized
Yeah.
level. And this did have this kind of, I don't know, touching. I mean, the way the film even opens,
Yes.
sort of reveal of, oh, there's a man, he's sleeping in bed with a man. Like there's a kind of, the camera kind of tracks over to almost say, oh, look, he's in bed with a man. And I don't exactly remember Cosmo Full, but I don't think they would have shown something like that. And I think even ironically in actual Birdcage, the relationship that Armand and Albert has, it's sexless. It's very chaste. I mean, they're
Yeah.
never in bed together. It's, so to even intimate at, and I think we see a shot over the bed onto his lover's like kind of sexy, like naked back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which so like the fact that it starts with this pretty like
Right.
stirring pronouncement of sexuality.
Yeah.
I think I don't know. What year is this movie? 80s, 82?
Yeah. It's 82. I think. Yeah. Right.
Uh, which is also interesting to contextualize this with the AIDS crisis.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the sort of urgency of that, I don't know. It'd be interesting to think about how that was kind of, I don't know.
Like, yeah, it's sympathetic towards the queer community and in a way that is, I don't know if that's the right thing to say.
When it's interested. I mean, I think a shot like that coming around the bed to say he's in bed with a man, in one sense,
It's not trying to hide it.
it's
Yeah.
not trying to hide it, but at the same time, it is trying to say, hey, look, this isn't what
Uh,
you think,
mm,
which, to our maybe sensibility is a little old fashioned, but
right.
like, I think at the time it was trying to say, okay, we're taking you into a different world, and we're not doing it in a way that is like euphemistic.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
It's literal,
Have sex with people of the same gender. And yeah.
yeah. In 19 whatever 30 whatever Paris.
Speaking of which, wouldn't that's like the number one place I'd like to go back? Not number one, but
Well,
one
I
of
was gonna
the top
say
10 places.
you could just be there for a year and then leave before
Yeah, I just
but
want to go to all the like drag clubs in 1920s and 30s
yeah.
Paris.
Well,
Yeah.
and then with something else that kind of intrigued me too is, I've always been interested, and I think we've talked about, Cabaret and Weimar era Germany and that kind of general period in Europe, pre kind of Hitler's rise to power, where it was this very kind of libertine,
Yeah.
accepting society with a robust cafe culture and female impersonators, as they were called. And there were gay clubs and there were gay couples and all of these things that kind of flourished a bit. And what I think this movie's set in 32, 34, something like that. So to think only a few years later how Europe would be completely transformed, and what would Paris look like
Right.
by the end of that decade, it would be,
Wow.
destroyed in
Yeah.
many ways, and it would be under siege. Um, and so I don't know, I saw something there interesting parallel between, I don't know, like the AIDS crisis kind of, like if you think in New York and LA pre-HIV was this sort of like, people think of the 70s as the decade of like, okay, gay people could be more open, the bars weren't rated as much, and people did have open lives, and there wasn't the threat of the virus. I don't know if you've ever read Dancer from the Dance by Andrew Holleran, which is this like classic queer coming of, it's almost like a queer kind of take on The Great Gatsby, and it was written and set before AIDS existed. So it is this very kind of sexy, fun, sad romp in New York City in the 70s, but it's like the virus isn't even part of it. And I don't know, there's an interesting parallel there between,
Mm.
okay, we can just do what we want, we're free or something, and of the 70s, and then a kind of similar environment in the like late 20s, early 30s.
Right, right. Well, I see now what you're making the comparison to, like AIDS, like as Hitler, as this.
Is
That's
that
fair for everybody involved. I think that's a fair comparison. But yeah, like in the way that it decimated an entire culture and lives ended, but that also creates this like attendant shame that then filters into the culture. Because by the time that like I was growing up on the tail end and after the AIDS crisis was like, you know, that was those things were connected, like being ill and being socially aberrant and being gay were all the way I was taught. They were one. And so even from the outside, like, again, that's why this movie to me is not really made for gay people, although a gay person can certainly enjoy it, as I have, but like it's almost made, like you're saying, to kind of normalize is a stupid word. It's treating these characters, for example, I want to talk about like Toddy and also Squash, the bodyguard. Squash I almost love more, like the way that he is treated as, he's just like, oh, I'm gay. And there's so many wonderful lines, like when he's boxing with King Marsh, like he's still masculine, Squash is like, he's still, and King is like, you are all American. And he's like, well, if you didn't want people to call you gay, you became all American. And he's like, but I know lots of guys. And he's like, yeah, you know lots of guys. You'd be surprised. Yeah. Like the amount of times that like other characters will say, yeah, like lots of people are gay. Or like when Norma is telling Toddy, like, I think the right woman could turn you. And he's like, I think the right woman could turn you. You know, there's just this like back and forth, like a queer perspective is on the same, you know, power balance and in a very almost like fantastical way, like that they're able to speak to each other as equals.
To that point, I mean, part of the way that the film's set up is that, you know, the Julie Andrews character, she can't get work as a biologically presenting female singer, because in the world of the film, female quote impersonators are more popular as nightclub entertainers than women.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know, when I was watching that, I was like, is this a plot hole? Like, but again, I do know there were eras where that was very I don't know if it was like impossible to find work, but I think it was like maybe the implication being, I don't know what you thought, but like, oh, you know, she's not a serious kind of singer. And if you can't be an opera singer and you're not in the symphony hall, the only place for you is in the cabaret, and the cabaret is not the place for cisgendered per se women. It's almost like that's the kind of implication that they, you know, despite Sally Bowles and Cabaret proving otherwise. And that's another comparison too, is if you think about like Sally Bowles in Cabaret and Julie Andrews in this movie, how, you know, obviously Liza Minnelli doesn't undergo any sort of similar transformation, but her characterization as a woman does have this masculine edge to it. Whereas there is a marked kind of transformation, you know, in the first part of this movie, you know, Andrews is very feminine and she's clutching and she's screams when she sees a cockroach, and like there is, you know, there is an effort to make.
She is more scared of that cockroach than getting
raped, which is like such an odd. She's almost like willing to go along with the rape until
she sees the cockroach.
And then what I didn't quite understand is like she sees the cockroach that she's so afraid of, and then somehow off screen
picks it up,
gets the cockroach that she was so afraid of to take it into her purse so that she can plant it in her food at the restaurant.
Yeah.
Which they've seen apparently a lot of times.
Yeah, a lot of people do that.
Like that's very common.
It's amazing though.
And it was weird in the, I don't know, what did you think about, like, is it a Mancini soundtrack? It had that kind of feeling to it.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's like a grand sweeping soundtrack, which to me oddly kind of undercut some of the comedy at times.
Interesting. It has this feeling of like a really grand old.
It's very grand. Yes.
In a way that is, yes, it is Mancini.
Blake Edwards contributor. Obviously, Mancini wrote the classic Pink Panther song.
And Blake Edwards also, didn't he direct Breakfast at Tiffany's?
Oh, did he? Oh, maybe he did.
Did I don't know. Maybe I made that up. Yeah. He did.
Well, there you go.
Which
yeah, look,
so it's really
we're not qualified if we didn't know that.
I guess not. but that's what I mean, is like taking this like queer story and placing it in a kind of movie that most, I don't know, American Western audiences see in a like very traditional heterosexual kind of movie. I did like that it like treated it with seriousness, but then there are moments where it doesn't do that it's also very interesting, you know. It's also, it takes the comedy very seriously, I guess, in some moments, like really committing to the bit, you know. There are certain moments that are just like so amazing, like you would think they would have had to have like spent hours shooting it for something that's just a gag on screen. So there's something like, yeah, very Pink Panther, very like pratfall, screwball kind of comedy about it all, which again, just like when I think of those movies, I think of, you know, straight people in those in and like love stories with like Cary Grant in them, you know, and so
And there is a heterosexual love story in this that
yeah, sucks.
is, well, yeah, it does suck.
Like, why is she attracted to King? Like, does that ever answered? Is it just because, you know, he's what's his name?
Because he's hot. James Garner?
James Garner, yeah. Is it just because he's him? I don't know.
I
It's
think he
like,
may be too hot.
yeah.
He's like he's mustache hot.
I don't like that she ends up with him. I
You
mean,
like her smoking a cigar though.
yes, the smoking the cigar is great. Well, so that's yeah, that's what I was going to say earlier is like in a way watching this again, I didn't think of it before, but it also made me think of Tootsie, which you know, Tootsie has this very like screenwriting book hook, which is like he becomes a woman to become a better man. And I was asking, like, is Victoria doing that? Does she become a better woman by becoming a man? And that masculinity you're talking about, does she always have that? Because, you know, when she's like sleeping with King and then they realize like it's not going to work out. And then she has this very masculine way of being like, oh, well, I guess it won't work out. And she gets up out of bed and he like reaches for her. Like he becomes feminized and she has this like masculine ability to just like get out of bed and be like, it's not going to work. So like, we're done. And I'm not going to cling to this. And I was thinking like, is she able to do that because of the time she has spent being a man? Or was that who she was all the time? I don't know if the movie really is clear on that.
It's an interesting point. I mean, one of the big turns in the first act is when she leaps out of that closet to
Mm-hmm.
tackle the lover of right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, in this, and again, she's accidentally perceived as a man before she intentionally is transformed into a man.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that's just like an accident. She's in the closet and she has this, you know, schmata on whatever on her head.
Yeah.
But part of it is because she's so fiercely. And so to your point though, I mean, I wonder if it's maybe she already had she more just learns to stand up for herself more in a way, which you could say is a masculine value, but I think you could take it more broadly that even from that scene in the apartment where she saves her friends, you know, from being attacked, she already had that in her. And maybe it's more her just owning it, or maybe it's her. I mean, maybe this is very modern lens of saying like she learns to own her power.
Hmm.
It might be a little
Yeah.
generous.
Well, yeah, because like I think there's a lot of like really good screenwriting stuff in this movie. Like from the beginning, you see that she's willing to lie to do. I mean, her very first scene is she's lied that she has an agent so that she can have this audition, and you see that right away. And so she's resourceful, and yeah, she has even though the world is not treating her well, like she doesn't doubt her right to exist in it and to be a singer and to be, you know, I don't know. We don't see her with any kind of lover other than the, you know, rape scene. But so that's interesting. We'd have to contrast like how she was with a man before this
Well, and
experience.
that scene, I mean, not to harp on this just insanely odd rape scene, but
Yeah.
like it starts with, which like that's what this entire episode will be about, is that one scene. But like, um,
It's a lot to
it,
talk about in that scene.
it is a lot to unpack there because like the context of that, if I remember correctly, is like she's going to be kicked out of her apartment
Yeah.
and by her landlord, so she kind of propositions him.
She's straight up. She's like, I'll suck
He's
your
like,
dick.
I'll suck
For a
your dick
meatball. For a
for a
meatball.
meatball.
So
And then
hungry.
he's like, I don't want a woman who will do that. But then he starts to try to rape her. So it's like he kind of is taking her up on it.
Yeah.
And she's sort of like, as we said, it's like kind of like, oh no, until she sees a cockroach and then she really freaks out. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
very odd. And I don't know, was that considered like dark humor? Like I don't even know.
I'd say it's pretty dark humor. I mean, because remember, she's starving. Like, I think that's the thing you have to buy in about that scene is that she's weak with hunger. I don't know if it's before or after the cream puff scene.
It's directly after the
After,
ridiculous scene
which
where
is like,
it was odd for me because like even in that scene where she's looking through the window of the restaurant and she sees this kind of, you know, Zoftig man eating a cream puff, and it's like a series of progressive close-ups that are getting tighter and tighter on this cream puff, and like she's playing it like the utmost serious drama.
yeah,
And the music is dramatic, but it's obviously really silly and stupid what's
yeah.
happening. So it is a kind of odd,
And it's
funny
always doing
moment.
that. It's
Yeah,
always
it's always
holding that, like, everything is treated with almost the same level of like seriousness and absurdity, which
Or like mock seriousness. Yeah.
sexuality, including rape, including queerness,
And poverty too. It makes a lot
poverty.
of
Yeah.
jokes of like, I mean, even the joke at the restaurant of like when she's trying to pass off this cockroach, she's trying to put a cockroach in her food to get a free opulent meal. They say, "Oh, we've only ever seen two cockroaches in the restaurant before, and both times it was because someone was trying to get a free meal."
Mhm.
So it's like clearly this is not a, nice
Going on.
world.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and one other thing I wanted to say about the cream puff scene
Yeah.
is when I saw that, it made me think of Cabaret, but a lot of the references that come into Cabaret from, new objectivity in German art of like, Otto Dix and things like this, where they're sort of overly exaggerating the physical putrescence of the wealthy.
Mhm.
And this man, and he's this big fat
Yeah.
face and cream puff, and he has these red cheeks, and it's like, and she's out, and he's just eating this trifle, like it's nothing, and cream's dripping off that, he doesn't even need. But so there's some images in there that felt kind of also in that same toolbox, and no doubt, because what Cabaret is in 72 or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
that feels like that's definitely like a high level reference for this, right?
Yeah.
Like,
It's definitely interesting to think about this in conversation with Cabaret. But again, like, it's almost like not political, this movie. What you were just saying about the cream puff, I agree about the visuals and it's pointing these things out, but it's never like, never did I walk away from this movie being like, it was critical of the wealthy,
yeah.
or neither is it critical of gay people and, or
Or
straight.
homophobes,
Yeah,
really.
or homophobes. Yeah, which is, yeah, like
I mean,
Norma.
it's not particularly sympathetic to homophobes.
No, no, but it's just weird. It exists in like a universe that I've never been in, but I don't mind it.
I mean, they kind of just treat everyone with a good serving of dignity
Yeah, and absurdity
and
too. Like,
absurdity,
I mean,
which is
yeah.
nice because that this is kind of an equal opportunity offender.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And then like Richard, the guy who he's sleeping with in the beginning, who turns out to be just like horrible. It's interesting to me that like a couple times in the movie, Julie Andrews' character has like clear morals, and it's just like from the heart, she's like, no, that man who just insulted a man that he slept with and took his money, he deserves to be beat up. And when she just like has this clear sense of like, she can see the dignity in everybody, and that's like the
that's a great point.
movie.
That's a great point because I mean, part of one of the most effective aspects for me of the film is their friendship.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is a classic, straight woman, gay man. This is a
Yeah.
classic trope, but it's also a classic feature of gay life. And I found their dynamic very touching at times.
Very touching.
And,
Yeah.
I think it's interesting when she invites him to sit down at her table at the restaurant. They go back. She can't go to her house because of the cockroach rapist. And so she goes back to his, kind of hovel.
Yeah.
And I think correct me if I'm wrong,
It's a
but
nice.
don't they have a conversation where it's like, she's like, "Can I ask you a question?" And he's like, "Am I a homosexual?" And she goes, "No." Like, that's
Yeah.
not, she doesn't, maybe she knows or doesn't know or doesn't care, but she doesn't care.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he kind of belies a certain kind of, "Oh, you must have some morbid curiosity about me," which she clearly does not harbor.
Right. Right. And
And
and that's what I mean about like that's not totally realistic to the way that I've experienced straight women in my life, and in any time period. I mean, there are yeah, many who just like humans where we can see each other's dignity, but there's this veneer of the way that we're socially trained, and like Julie Andrews' character never has that. Like even later on when King is talking to her at the cigar scene, there's like moments where she really questions his take. She's like, well, if you think I'm feminine, I can still be a man. So why do you think that I'm not a man? And she has this like clarity that is very interesting and is the way the movie is speaking from that point of view, which is nice.
sure.
Yeah.
Um, which I think is in a way kind of sums up the movie's politics, if you will. Is
Yeah.
it's not going out on a limb, but it's
Yeah.
also not, it's I don't know. I mean, I think it comes out of a kind of social place. You can see the context of the people who made it, who probably had gay friends and knew gay people, but wouldn't go out of their way to talk about it in certain rooms, I think probably, but were socialized with them and went to dinner with them and had friends,
Yeah.
like that kind of, 80s kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the kind of thing that kind of lasted, until pretty recently, where it was like there was a pretty divided, but not that divided, but oh, I have gay friends, like that kind of thing.
But who would do what she does to King, where she really questions his attitudes on gay men, where she says, "You don't think that me and Toddy are in love? Is that because we're two men?" Those kinds of things like you're talking about. I know what you're talking about, this like bifurcation of like, oh, we'll hang with our gay friends, but then in the straight rooms, we're not going to talk about it. But like she's talking about it. And this movie, while it doesn't go out on a limb, it almost kind of
It
does.
does actually, yeah. She
It's
goes out on it.
He does, yeah, and questions everybody, but it's still like very, like going back to Toddy, it's interesting because I love his character and I love their relationship. And I think a queer person writing Toddy could have been kinder to him. Like there's something about his life that is kind of fitting this straight stereotype of like a kind of perpetually lonely gay man,
Older, bitter, queer,
Yeah. Like there's
jettison, paying for sex, all of those kind of
yeah,
tired.
transactional relationships only. Like all of his relationships are transactional. And like there's that moment where she's crying and he says, like, only I could cry like that. And it's like one of the saddest lines in the movie.
Moment, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's very, I don't know. It's just like it's like a straight person with a really good heart trying is making this movie.
Trying their best, trying their absolute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Which, for the time period, I'm sure was off-putting to a lot of people, and
right.
trying to get this movie made, I'm sure was not, a piece of cake. And it probably didn't hurt, of course, that you had this like superstar director and superstar cast to do it. But I'm sure this was a tough sell to get made.
Yeah.
Even though I think there was evidence from the 70s that these kinds of things would work. And I think,
Right.
like I said, like Cabaret and the French Cauchefol and things, I'm sure,
I can't imagine it would not be hard to get it made, just
really gonna be hard to get made nowadays.
exactly.
I feel like.
We've heard meetings where people are like, are people really going to get those gay characters?
What I'm sure was, well, a pretty fairly expensive movie. I mean, they didn't exactly spend a lot of money on that studio lot. They're trying to pass off as,
Paris.
1944 Paris. But I was like, oh, okay. Like it was clearly shot in Burbank. But so I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know if I don't know much about like what inspired him to make this movie, but it's a funny kind of thing for an original idea, because it almost sounds like it would be the other way around, that it started out as a musical and became a
Yeah.
movie, but it's and it's not really a musical movie.
And again, it doesn't have like a point in the way that Tootsie does. It's not trying to say, oh, she becomes a better woman through this, or, and I really want to ask you what you think of the end, because I think it's really weird. Yeah, actually, let me just ask you, what do you think of the end?
Okay. I don't know how to take it.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's your read on it? What's
I
your
read
read
on
on
it.
it?
Well,
Yeah.
on the one hand, there is a tension that starts to bother me as I'm watching the movie, which is like it wouldn't be the right ending for a straight woman to make a living as a drag performer. That's not what we want. Do I want her to go with this man who washes women's mouths out with soap and like is, even though she tests him and she pushes him, and I even think I want to the sidebar like King's sexuality, because I think this movie makes a pretty good case that he's gay also.
Right? Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Like, did she want to be with this closeted gangster? Hell no, that's not a good answer for her, but she does end up in a nice dress in the end, so we love that. But the ending with Toddy, like I wish that they could have shown like a real drag performer doing something that was also beautiful and
Rather
glamorous.
than like this sad kind of
Like, why does it have to be? And there are drag performers who are openly comedic. I know, but like, why he was a singer in before this movie started? Like, why couldn't he have been elegant and a great drag? Like, why couldn't we have seen a real good drag performance? I guess.
Or like even like I mean, this is an odd reference, but like like Little Miss Sunshine
Yeah.
ends with, okay, she can't perform like the kind of pageant girls, but she does her own kind of silly but it has a lot of heart to it, and it relates to her grandfather, and it's like it's to this weird song, and it is this like she doesn't fit in, but she does a nice job. And I don't think in Little Miss Sunshine, I think they treat her with a lot of seriousness, even though
Yeah.
she's silly. And here with him performing in this ridiculous drag, and even the idea that he could try to pass himself off as her,
Right.
which is obviously like ludicrous.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't sure whether we were supposed to laugh at him or with him, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how I felt too. It just, for the whole movie to be so delightful and so good-hearted and such a like fun romp, I was like, oh, okay.
Like the sad clown or something.
Yeah. And I don't like it. I don't like that they're like even making fun of his body in ways, too. Like I think
He's progressively desexualized throughout the film. Like
yeah,
it's if we start at the beginning, he is
explicitly sex.
quasi-sexualized because he's in bed with a man, and by the end, he's just buffoon, this sort of
Yeah.
ugly asexual buffoon.
Yeah.
Um, and which I think points out a trope of a lot of these kinds of movies, which is by these kinds of movies, I mean, the kind of gay movies made by straight people is like the gay people rarely find love or sustain love.
Right.
Whereas he doesn't have a love interest,
Right.
and I
Right.
feel like that if you remade this nowadays, he'd kind of need to, have that, right? Like,
And
it's
he would have like he should have an arc from the beginning where like he has some sort of insecurity about performing as a drag performer, and then he comes out
that
and
didn't come up, right? Like there was no like, oh, one day I need to go back onto the stage. There was nothing like
right. It's not a fulfillment of anything for him, and
self-sacrifice in service
yeah, he sort of
of
loses.
his friend.
Yeah, he's playing that kind of like gay character, just supporting the like heterosexual. It ends in this very traditional heterosexual way, which is like, oh, okay.
Which is odd because it's like she's the main character, but we do
Wait,
also get his perspective.
Toddy does have a love interest, Squash,
Oh, right, of course. Yeah, right.
bodyguard, which he does. So
He
that's
does.
he does get the
There you
bodyguard.
go. He does get with a buddy. So he does get it.
And he does like there's that moment, it happens twice, I think, when Victoria is performing as Victor and she throws the flower to King, and he
Right.
has a moment where he catches it in public. I
Right.
think this movie is not really, it's not really a movie from a queer perspective, but it is questioning homophobia, I think, very
Sure.
direct,
Yes.
in the way that like it's like, yeah, should he be and like the way that she proposes that they can live together as a couple, but only if he pretends to be a gay man, basically, because he's going to have to live as if he has a male partner, and like questioning that. So there's this moment where like he catches the flower and he's like, oh my god, I'm
Oh,
so,
yeah.
and then later Toddy throws the flower to Squash and he's like just so happy to have it.
Happy.
Lovely. Like at least he loves
Pretty transgressive moment. Actually, I totally did forget about that, but that is a very transgressive moment of catching that flower.
Yeah, yeah. And it's really nice. And I really love, like, he's kind of I mean, he's definitely my favorite character. I love him. I love how devoted he is to King. I love the hotel room antics, the whole like sneaking around. That is too good. And like the moment where he ends up on the balcony and like King's, looking up from the outside. So good. But like what was I trying to say? Toddy can tell that he's gay before Squash comes out. And when they're at that cigar night and Toddy sees Squash sitting alone and he goes and sits with him, I found that really interesting on a second watch, that he was like, I'm going to go over there. And we don't see them together is the interesting thing. We should,
Like
but
his gaydar is being perked or something.
yeah, yeah. And it would be nice to see them really connecting. We never do.
Well, so this is the remake. We need it from Squash's perspective.
Yes. Yes. He's
Just
the real
Squash,
hero.
like they did with Cuckoo's Nest with Nurse Ratched, where they just gave her own show. So we need
Yes.
Squash to have his own show.
His own, yeah.
Like
But so
that.
Squash is like, because I just think it's so touching, the scene where he sees King in bed with Victoria, but he thinks it's Victor, and he comes out to King right afterwards. He's like, you made me so happy. Again, that like unashamed, unabashed kind of like presentation of someone coming out is not something I was exposed to ever growing up in the 90s. So it's just interesting to see it here.
Well, yeah, because it's Tootsie is not for everything that happens in Tootsie. There's nothing queer about Tootsie. Like,
Except for when she what's her name? The actress. What's her
Yeah,
Jessica Lange. Jessica Lange.
yeah, Jessica Lange, Jessica Lange.
She falls in love with she's falling for oh wait, shoot, my screen has gone dark.
He falls in love with a woman.
Yeah, like she kisses there's a scene where he's dressed as oh my god, my screen is dark. Can you see me though?
Yeah.
Okay, fine, whatever. It's weird. My screen. Okay.
Actually, I was going to say earlier on in the when you had the mirror and the sort of fur coat, it was really giving a sort of Petra von Kant sort
Oh,
of vibe, which I was enjoying.
actually haven't seen that movie. I
Uh,
only
you
so
got
I
it. No,
yeah, we should have done like a real queer filmmaker probably, but we can do that next.
the next one for
Yeah.
the next one. But no, but it is interesting just to think about it in contrast to Tootsie and then even to the Birdcage, which holds up pretty well, actually, all things considered. But like, I mean, the characters are totally asexual. I mean, their femininity is discussed, and the femininity is the subject of the film. But like, it's not these kinds of movies generally tend to kind of eschew that. And even in Some Like It Hot,
Mhm.
it's really just a punchline. I mean, it's maybe a little bit more than a punchline.
Yeah.
Um,
I always think of when who's got the love story with Marilyn Monroe.
the Jack Lemmon. Oh no, the Tony Curtis character.
Tony Curtis comes onto stage and kisses
Yeah.
her and as a dressed as a woman. And I guess this is honestly, I've watched all these movies from the perspective of a closeted woman. So
Mm.
it would be interesting to rewatch them now as a person who owns my queerness because at that time those movies made me go like, oh, like she kissed her, she thought she was a girl but she was still into it, that like questioning of like, and one thing that said early on in this movie is like people see what they believe or they believe what they see, right? Like there's this sense of like just seeing not even two women kiss, but like a woman kissing a man dressed as a woman who she thinks is a woman were moments for me where I was kind of questioning my own sexuality because I loved to see that and seeing those characters really enjoy, being in a sexual situation with somebody who they think is their own gender, I don't know if I'm making a point with this or
No, no,
not.
no, it makes sense. And I think it relates to Some Like It Hot, where there's essentially a trans relationship or queer relationship that is the B plot line of that entire movie,
Mm-hmm.
but not literally. And it kind of just made me think, in the relationship between this and Victor Victoria of how I once read the script, the actual screenplay of Some Like It Hot. And it at the end, there's a famous line where he says, "Oh, I can't marry you. I'm a man." And he takes his wig off. And Osgood said, "Oh, well, nobody's perfect."
Right.
There's an action line in the script that says, "But that's a story, but that's another story, and it's one we don't think America's yet ready to hear." The end.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So was it ready? Is this film in a
Mhm.
way an answer to that in some capacity? Like they maybe were a little more ready.
It's a little more ready, but it's still not there. There's that moment when King kisses Victoria for the first time in the alleyway, and he says, "I don't care if you are a man. I want to kiss you." And she says, "I'm not." And he says, "I still don't care."
Yeah.
But but King already saw her naked. He does know she's a woman at that moment. That's what came out to me in the second viewing. Like, which also I did not love him spying on her naked for her.
Yeah, that's the list of
King's faults, but yeah, he like creeped on her. But so that's what I found really interesting just from a screenwriting point of view, because for the whole next bit of the movie, there's this great dramatic irony where he does know that she's a woman. And so that line is disingenuous because he knows that she's a woman. But it's interesting that it's said. It's very similar to the one you're referencing from Some Like It Hot. Like, oh,
is
well,
there
I don't care about your external appearance. I love you as the person, which is, I think, what as a person who's bi or pan maybe or something, like, I want to see that, but it's still not truthful in this movie, is it?
no, this is not a movie of truths. I don't
Mm.
think it's a movie of partial truths.
Yes, and sly winks at the
Yes,
camera.
and winks. It is a
Yeah,
it is a very winking, but again, it's not euphemistic to the degree of its predecessors, which
right.
are just totally euphemistic.
Right.
And Some Like It Hot is purely euphemistic for that one kiss, but even that is dissolved almost instantaneously because he takes the I think he takes his wig off during the
No,
kiss.
because she kisses, he kiss that what I love about it is she
Oh, oh,
kisses
oh.
her and then runs away. And Marilyn Monroe's standing there just like struck on stage. She's like, oh, that was wonderful.
It takes her a minute to.
Like she's into it. She's like, I guess I liked that girl.
It's funny. It just made me think. I just went and saw. I've been in a little Mae West kick,
Oh,
and they were screening. Oh, that's. I mean, have you seen her films? I
yes,
think yeah.
but not actually a lot of Mae West. I just know
There's,
about
there's not a lot of them that are like,
that.
but I mean, she's just anyway. So I was watching My Little Chickadee, which has a lot of horrible problems. It's really like vile in many ways. But there is a funny line. The whole movie is she's, manipulating every single man in that movie and using everyone just to get whatever she wants. I mean, she's amazing in it. But there's a line where she says something to the degree of, oh, a kiss is like a man's signature.
Hmm.
And because there's a character, a masked character in the film who she's in love with, and it turns out he's a man who she already knows. And when she kisses him, she puts it together through the kiss.
Hmm.
And that movie is very the masked character that she's in love with in that movie, it looks like he's wearing a gimp suit. It's like totally bizarre. I swear to God. But and the interesting thing I'll just say of that movie is, it's basically her having these multiple competing lovers, but really two main lovers. And it's really kind of set up that you think, okay, there's the good guy and the bad guy, and she's obviously going to go with the good guy at the end of the movie. And by the end, she basically just says, well, I love you both, and maybe I'll marry one of you, but in the meantime, come up sometime and you can both I can see you both, basically. It like ends on a I'll see you both. Like
Oh,
I keep seeing you both.
yeah.
Um, which she feels like an ancestor to some of these
Yeah, it's so that's what I love about like seeing movies pre-code, actually, pre the Hays Code, It makes me remember that like people have always been like transgressive and sexual
and
and
she was majorly transgressive.
polyamorous and yeah, and like that wasn't so questioned, I guess, at that time that she was making.
She was the queen of the euphemism, right? So every line in the movie is a euphemism.
Hmm.
Nothing is said explicitly.
Yeah.
But she actually got in, she was, she wrote the script for that movie. She wrote all of her own scripts, and she was a playwright, and she actually wrote Broadway plays about gay characters. One of her plays was raided by the police and she was arrested for obscenity charges.
Oh.
But yes, it is a pre-code thing. And the funny thing with the code is Some Like It Hot was during the code, but it was kind of when the code was ending and losing sway with the
Mhm.
industry. And they said, we're going to go ahead and make this movie anyway. Screw you. And it made so much money that they said, oh, okay, we're done with that. Like, I guess we're moving on to a different way of self-policing.
I mean, yeah, I love that that movie was part of like breaking the code, and it just shows like people, I don't know, where we have this sense that people want this puritanicalism in their art.
And it's never been the case because you go back to Greek drama and it's filthy. You go back to the oldest, books ever written, Don Quixote, Tale of Genji, all of these, they're all filthy. So like,
It's so dirty. I love it.
like read the Bible. The Bible's filthy. I'm just saying, it's like, it's not so
Right.
fun.
It's like,
But
where do
like,
we get this idea that in order to make a piece of art palatable, we have to like cover it with this like patina of like sexlessness?
I don't know, it's a Victorian value or something. It feels like a very Victorian era kind of holdover or something. Um, but that's a story for another.
Yes. Another movie. Will you say anything else about Victor Victoria? Why did you recommend it to me?
I just thought I knew you kind of liked Cabaret and kind of those movies, and it just has this beautiful, like, kind of well-made old Hollywood kind of, I don't know, the great stars and the gowns. I don't know, it just kind of has all of that kind of, it's just like a good, I don't know, kind of an oddly feel-good movie.
Yeah.
And I've always, when I think of Julie Andrews, I mean, anytime getting to spend time with Julie Andrews is just like a treat because she really is, even if she's like totally over the top, she is still just so stupidly watchable, and she's
Yeah.
stupidly watchable in this movie.
Yeah.
And I just
I love how
thought,
silly she lets herself be in this movie too.
Yeah, no, she's going over the top on it, but I kind of love it. And it's like she's about as far away from like Maria as
Yeah.
you can imagine.
Yeah.
And no, I just thought you would I thought you would appreciate just the kind of complexities of its queerness.
Yeah, well, thank you. I did all of those things, and it was just such an interesting one to watch for like being made at its time, and it's so fun. And I think for somebody who likes really cheesy jokes too, like my favorite freaking moment in it was the when the inspector sits down on the stool and he's like, "Be careful." He's like, "I'm always careful." He's like, "The stool is broken." Like those stupid, stupid jokes. I really appreciate when people put really stupid jokes into movies.
Oh, I
They,
love that. And I love the contrast of those jokes. And then there's the tenderness that I was going to say I think my favorite little detail in the movie is just, when they're sort of like after the restaurant scene where they're in his apartment and
yeah,
they're really cold and he keeps boiling water and putting it in the bathtub because they don't have hot running water. And they're having this whole scene, the entire scene, he's just running back and forth with this tea kettle.
yeah.
And they're sort of like drinking whiskey or something and like sailing in the bathtub. And it's like, I don't know, it just felt very real or something. It felt very intimate and like that, and a specific kind of like, straight woman, gay man kind of intimacy of just like, I don't really care what I'm wearing or how I look or what's going on. And we're just trying to get through it together.
Yeah, I honestly think that's my favorite scene too, and it just has so much tenderness and love in it that it just fills the whole movie. I love that.
It's very lively too, cinematically. It's
Yes.
a good scene.
I know. It's just yeah, there were so many moments too, and I know you have to go, but just where I was like, this is so well directed, and I know you appreciate just like solid, clear, precise, fucking great
Very,
direction.
very. Well, anyway, well, I love this. So, happy to come back and
Yes, please
maybe we
come
can talk
back.
about a movie made by queer people next time and contrast in this canon of mistaken queer identity comedies
Yeah.
of Hollywood.
Yes, yes,
Fill in
definitely.
fill in the series.
Yeah,
Uh,
good little series for us. And thank you so much for doing this. I just love talking to you about movies. It reminds me of our culture hunt days,
oh,
and you're just so brilliant and you know so much. So I just appreciate your mind. Thank you so much
always love chatting with you. Great seeing you. And let's do it again soon.
for sure.